you think that, sometimes we South Africans, not just a portion of South Africans, feel like we are frogs in a pot, slow boiling pot of water. Do, do you think this is what it is? I mean, if you think about what apparently was said to you by the late Dr. Ambrosini, who was MP of the Inkatha Freedom Party at some point, do you see some of that stuff becoming real? I mean, are we really being taken for a ride? Is there like a grand scheme plan behind everything that's happening?
Well, that quote actually was said to me by Mario Ambrosini, and he repeats it in his own autobiographies. Very sadly and tragically, he died of cancer at a young age. So it's, we can't go back to source in this case. He quoted what Ramaphosa said to him during the constitutional negotiations. He said, I'm going to, the whites will be like putting the frog into boiling water, but you just boil the water very slowly so they adjust to the change in temperature. Meantime, we take away their assets, we take away some of their words to that effect. Obviously, I don't know if Ramaphosa said it, but Ambrosini said he did say it. But I think it's actually not a bad description of the South African condition, white, black, colored or Indian, just generally, that we start to adjust to things that really are unacceptable. And so we start to adjust to the fact we don't have electricity 24/7, which, in 2022 is not the way a modern industrial economy or any basic country should operate. We start to make provision by not relying on the state at all. I was very struck, I think on the 5th of March this year, The Economist magazine published an article about South Africa called The Parallel State. And these more or less were, and basically how the middle class in South Africa have completely, although they're paying a huge amount of tax, opted out of state provision. And there were many figures, but the one that really struck me was they quoted figures from 1997, which said there were about, and these more or less the ratio, 117,000 police officers in the country and about 125,000 private security guards. Fast forward to last year, there were about 135,000 police officers and 560,000 private security guards because people buy their own security. And in a way, for the middle classes and the upper reaches of society, it's a bit like the National Party backbencher once accused me when I was first got to Parliament for the Liberal PFP or DP. He said, it's very easy. Your voters can buy their apartheid. Mine can't, which was a very profound point, actually, about why apartheid mattered to certain cohort of whites in South Africa and was irrelevant to others who didn't really need the protection of that system. And what you've got now in South Africa in the upper reaches of our society are people who buy their own apartheid, but they buy their own privilege. They live in enclaves, they behind security walls, they have private schooling, and they have inverters instead of electricity. And there's a long checklist you could go down, Solly. But that's not normal, that's abnormal. And we start to normalize the abnormal. We start to accept mediocrity as the default position. We start to take for granted that there's no accountability. These are not
to make excuses for some of the things that happen.
Absolutely. And so in that sense, there is a frog boiling attitude in South Africa. But look, there are many gifts to living here, as you know. I mean, it is still a beautiful country. People here are pretty nice despite the conditions to which they're subject. Right. And there are, I can carry on about how people mind the gap. But, I was just addressing a group of international lawyers the other day who gathered, can you believe it, to play polo in Plettenberg Bay. But I mean, that's what well-heeled lawyers do from around the world. And I just said to them, you come to Plettenberg Bay with all this privilege and all this squalor, one very small community. But I said, you've also got these amazing NGOs, these community organizations that step in and do things that the state should be doing, but doesn't do. And we stop to expect it.
Isn't it scary that, we had NGOs during apartheid before the ANC came into power. A lot of those people who did that NGO community work around the country at some point thought, we have a government for the people, by the people. We don't need to do this anymore. Let all the resources go to the government. Yeah. Now it seems like some of them are beginning to say, wait a minute, maybe we shouldn't have done that. Now they're coming back to do the job
They
That
are.
is not the government for the people, but the people would do on their behalf, and it's not. It's failed dismally, isn't it?
I completely agree with you, and we should demand and expect and hope for more. But there's a wonderful old South African saying, "A boer maak 'n plan." That actually when people just step in and they innovate. And I mean, one of the extraordinary features of the South African economy, if you look outside the state, in other words, in the private sector, is you've got these innovative companies that have actually managed to profit and to be ingenious in times of stress. And so, yeah, there are opportunities within all the dysfunctionality, and some people have been smart enough and savvy enough to take advantage of that. And good luck to them, because nobody likes a vacuum.
But surely, Tony, this parallel state thing, I think a lot of, if you talk to individuals, I don't see they look at the bigger picture or they care about the bigger picture. It's their own survival every day. Do I have sufficient security? If I can't get it from the police, if I can't get protection from the police, I'll do it myself. Do I have sufficient electricity supply, or if for my business, whatever nature of business you're running, if I don't get it, I'm going to pay it for myself. Then everybody ends up doing the same thing. Then we continue paying taxes to a government that is using that money for something else. Surely,
stealing. Stealing the money is what's happened. Is the Zondo Commission has given us in painful detail. More than R1 trillion, by all accounts, was stolen during the so-called lost decade, which continues unabated. I mean, it's one thing to say that Zuma's a crook and a scoundrel, and he undoubtedly was both those things in the latter days of his presidency. But I mean, Ramaphosa has barely, made a dent in terms of interdicting this. He talks, he appoints a commission, he does a few gestures, but actually, I think the thing that really unsettled, the frog did jump out of the pot last July, when the looting and the wholesale rioting began in the Durban area, where I'm from originally, spread to Joburg, and suddenly 300 people had lost their lives while the police stood by, the military intelligence failed, the state was ineffectual or indeed enabling of the larceny. And Ramaphosa made another pompous speech talking about an attack on the state itself, and yet here we are, where we now in March, so we're some 9 months down the line, and not a single person has been arrested, indicted, convicted, or imprisoned who led that rioting. We know who they are, the social media messages. Some of them came from Nkandla. So nothing's happened. So you begin to say, well, for a lot of people, I think that was a turning point. And there's an article in the Financial Mail this week, which indicates the fact that, we can talk about the poor and the dispossessed, and we should. That's how most, unfortunately, South Africans live. But 1% of taxpayers in this country pay 50% of the taxes that you mentioned. And the problem is at the very top end,
all the time.
Those guys are leaving the country. And Knight Frank, the international property group, said that there's been a surge out of South Africa since last July when those riots happened. So it doesn't just have a consequence in terms of, people's lives, livelihoods, and those terrible things, but actually it just undermines the ability of the state to make any kind of provision, because the people who are paying to keep the state going are exiting the country. So if you don't get a wake-up call from that, then you've got to say nothing will wake you up.